Okay, today's daf is daf Ayin Gimel, and we're going to begin from daf Ayin Beis Amud Beis. Okay, we're up to Meisvei, right over here. Right over here, Meisvei. It's about Meisvei. So what are we talking about over here? We're talking about over here. Rab Loza said that oral, someone who has no bris milah, he b'diavad could splash the afer para. There's two processes. One, there's the process of taking the afer para, the ashes of the par, mixing it with water. That's one of the processes of the afer para, of the paraduma. The other process is that if somebody's tameh, you need somebody to stick the azov into the water, mixed water with ashes, and splash it on him on the third day and the seventh day of his tameh mace. So we just begin there. Rab Loza said, orel that made a hazah is kosher, because we're talking about an orel. An orel is not allowed to eat truma, right? We learned somebody who's not circumcised can't eat truma. So Rab Loza said an orel could splash the hazah of the afer para. Okay, so here that's what we're up to. Meisvei. So the Gemara asks a question against Rab Loza. We learned in the Brisa, tumtum, somebody who we can't recognize if he's a zachar or a nekeva. So there's a possibility he's a zachar, possibility he's a nekeva. Either way, he doesn't have a bris milah because there's a membrane covering his aver. Shekidesh, if he mixed the ashes with the water, he did the mixing. That's called kiddush. Kiddush apostle. His kiddush is apostle, and we're assuming that just like his kiddush is apostle, so we're going to assume that his hazar is also apostle. But nay, because who suffix aral, but aral apostle the kaddish, and the aral is apostle to do kiddush. He's not allowed to do the mixing of the high sheldon. We began.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening. So we just began. We're just discussing that the one Amand Yama said that oral, somebody who's not circumcised, could splash the paraduma waters on somebody. And here we're seeing a brisa that says an oral is puzzle for kiddush. Androgynous, the brisa continues and says somebody who's an androgynous, so he has both the male and female simonim. So shekidesh, if that person does kiddushin, Kiddush kosher. We're talking about an androgynous that has a male organ that they gave a bris milah to, but the problem is he also has a female organ. So there, the Brisa says Kiddush kosher. He's kosher because the Tanakama holds a woman is permitted to do kiddushin, is permitted to mix the ashes of the paraduma with the water. Rabbi Yehuda says af androgynous shekidish kedusha psolim, Rabnei shesafik isha. Isha psula melekadish. Rabbi Yehuda argues, he says, because the androgynous has a part of him that's a woman, so if he does the kiddushin, or he, she, whatever you want to call him, does the kiddushin, is possible because a woman is not permitted to do is apostles when they mix the ashes and they do the kiddush of the paraduma. But ketanamia, there's a partial quote we just said, orel, an uncircumcised person, the suffix arel, if you're not sure if they're circumcised, it may be a woman, Pasam Lakadesh. So we see that it's not to do Kedushin. And so therefore, that's a Kasha Rab Loza, who said in the beginning of the page, Orel Shehiza, that does the splashing, Hazaz and Kshera. Answers the Gemara, Omar Rav Yosef said, Hi Tana de Rebbe Akivahu. This Tana of our Mishnah, of that Brisa, is Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Akiva, the marble, how did Rabbi Akiva know that an oral is not permitted to eat truma? Because if you remember the pasuk, the pasuk says ish is the extra word ish that the Torah tells you a tameh can't eat truma, and the Torah says ish. So we marba an oral can't also eat truma. So the Gemara is saying a fascinating chiddush that Rabbi Yosef says the marabele oral ketuma. Rabbi Kiva will hold that just like a tameh could passel, could defile truma. So also an oral, if it touches truma, could also passel truma. The Tanya Rabbi Kiva Omer ish is Rabbi oral. That an oral is like a tameh, and it's a new thing. And if somebody's not circumcised, can't even touch truma. So therefore, if that's the case, that brisa that says that an oral can't do the kiddush is like Rabbi Akiva, who holds an oral is like a tameh. Just like a tameh can't do the kiddush of the para aduma, so also an oral who is like a tameh cannot do the kiddush of the para aduma. Amar Rava, so Rava says, wait a second, you're telling me that an oral, if it touches something, becomes tameh, and that's Rabbi Akiva's opinion? That's so odd. Amar Rava said, "Have a Yasiv Nekama Rav Yosef." I was sitting in front of Rav Yosef, and I told him this answer. Bekashili, and I was disturbed by this answer. Why? By this answer that Rav Yosef said, we don't find any Tana in Masechta Truma that says an oral and a tameh should not touch Truma or something like that. It never, we don't have V'leim with Rabbi Akiva, and that's Rabbi Akiva. If Rabbi Akiva has such a fascinating opinion that an oral has the same power as a tameh, so then why doesn't any Mishnah in the world discuss that? So the Gemara says, "V'la," you never find a Mishnah that says an oral has the same properties as a tameh. V'ktanu, we learned in a brisa, oral, uncircumcised, v'tameh, a tameh person, Peturim minariya, they're potter from visiting the Beis Hamikdash in Shalosh Regalim. The tameh is obvious because when he walks into the Beis Hamikdash, he's a tameh, and he'll be matama the Beis Hamikdash or whatever. So an oral also has the same properties as a tameh. So that's Rabbi Akiva's opinion that an oral can defile something of kedusha. So the Gemara says, Hassam over there, it's not because he's matama something. The reason why we don't want an oral to show up in the Beis Hamikdash, mishum dema is because he's repulsive to look at. He doesn't have a bris milah, but that's not because he's matama something. So we leave this unresolved. Again, we had the question of a brisa that seemed to say that an oral would not be able to do the kiddushin, and the Gemara assumes that he won't be able to do splashing. You can't give him a job of splashing people to make people tar. And yet Rabbi Laza said that he could take the job of splashing the paraduma waters. Now, new Gemara. And what the Gemara, as we've seen hundreds of times, is that every time we bring something up from Seder Taharis or Seder Zroyim, the Gemara just discusses it a little bit. And here we had a machlokes, can a woman do the kedusha of the paraduma? So we said the Tanna Kama said yes, and Rabbi Yehuda said no. So the Gemara says v'azde letameh. They're aligned. The Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yehuda are aligning their reasonings. The Tanya we learned in the Brisa, hakol t'sherim lekadosh. Everybody's permitted to do the kiddush of the paraduma, chutz, except mecheres shoyte v'katan, except the cheres shoyte v'katan. Right? Somebody who's can't hear or can't speak. A shoyte is an imbecile, and somebody under bar mitzvah. But a woman is permitted. Rabbi Yehuda machshir v'katan. Rabbi Yehuda says a katan is permitted. Upaisel be'isha v'androgynous, and he pasels and he says it's no good if a woman does the kedushin and androgynous who has a partial woman in him. So Gemara says, "My tamai the rabbanim." What is the reason of the rabbanim? So I'm going to show you the pasuk right over here on your screen. There's a pasuk that says, "Ba'asaf ish tahar es efer para." When they burnt the paraduma, the pasuk says a man who is tahar should gather the efer para. So we darshan from that. Ish is a man. It means excluding a child. A child is not permitted to sweep up those ashes, to gather them. And tahar means anybody who's pure, so that means including a woman. So we see that by gathering of the ashes, we exclude a child, but we include a woman. Few psukim later, when it tells you what to do with those ashes and mix it with water, take for a tameh from those ashes, and you put it put it into a water that spring water that's in a vessel. So there, the Torah talks about mixing it, which is the kiddush, which is the mixing the ashes with the water. So the Torah says those that were permitted to gather are the ones to mix the water. That's the Tanna Kama home. So that's what the Tanna Kama is.
Right, I have a quick question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
In the Mishnah Berurah, you talk about like mitzvahs that women could do, and usually it's preceded by the fact that there isn't a man to do it. So therefore, a woman could do it if there's no man capable of doing it. Is it the same thing here? Is there a hierarchy? Let's say there's a man and a woman that can do the Kiddush. And a man says, go ahead, honey, you could do it. Is that the case? Or there's no man and the women could do it? Or it doesn't matter? They're equal in as far as doing it.
It seems to me that once you permit a woman to do it, there's no hierarchy over here. Man, woman, because it says ish, okay, excluding a child. Tar means anybody who's pure, including a woman. So that's what the Chachamim will say. So that's what he said. My time is the Rabbanim, because it says v'lakhu latame masar freisa chachatas. The Torah tells you mix the ashes with the water. Hanach the pasli basifa, those that are not permitted to gather, which means a boy under bar mitzvah, pesulam b'kiddush, apostle to do the mixing of the water. Hanach, those the ksherim basifa are permitted to gather it. Ksherim b'kiddush are kosher to do the kiddush yadayim kosher to mix the ashes with the water. And since a woman is permitted to gather, she's also included into the mitzvah of mixing the ashes with the water. Rabbi Yehuda, how does he learn it? Why does he not make a woman kosher to do that mixing? And came nemakro v'lokach, my v'lokchu, da'afila hanach de psulam hasem k'shera hacha. What Rabbi Yehuda says over here is v'lokchu. It says those that are disqualified from the asifa can do the mixing. So he says that a child who could not gather it, once it's gathered the ashes, he's allowed to mix because v'lokchu is plural. So the Gemara's next question is, so then why can't the woman do the mixing? So he's going to say is because this word v'nasan, doing the mixing, is a masculine form, and therefore, and it seems to be a little extra. So we exclude a woman that it means not a female can do the mixing. That's what he says. Rabbi Yehuda says, those that are apostle to do the gathering, kisherim hacha are permitted to do the mixing. So Yehachi Ishanami. So the Gemara says, according to Rabbi Yehuda, why can't the woman do the mixing? Answers the Gemara, v'nasan, Bakar says masculine, only he is allowed to mix. Loi v'nasna, not she's permitted to do the mixing. V'Rabbanan, what do Rabbanan do? Because why did Rabbanan say a cotton is kosher to do the mixing? Because it's plural. If the Torah wrote it singular, because if you notice, look how the Torah wrote this pasuk. The Torah writes it plural over here, that they should take the ashes and he should put the water. He should put it into the water. So what did Rabbanan do with that? Rabbanan explained that pasuk. It says like this: if it would just say that in the singular form, havamina shakal chad v'yahev chad, that only one person can take the ashes and mix it in the water, but you can't have two people doing it. Kasav rachmana v'lachu. The Torah tells you lachu. One could take the ashes, and one could put it into the water, and another person can mix it. So that's what I would say. In other words, I would have thought that the one person that took the ashes, he puts it in the water, and only one person's allowed to mix it. How do you know one guy could put the ashes into the water, and another person can mix it? Like you make a freeze-dried coffee. Somebody puts the coffee in, and another person can mix it. That's why the Torah said, "V'lakhu," two people can get involved. Then why didn't the Torah write it everything plural? V'lakhu v'nasno, that two people can do everything. Because havamina, the shakal tray, v'yav tray, I would think that you need two people to always, two people to take the ashes and put it in the water, and two people to mix it. Even if two people take the ashes and put it in the water, one other person could do the mixing. In other words, you can separate the steps. One the mixing, one person can put it in the water. So that's the bottom line. We go to the top of Ayin Gimel Lamed Aleph. Another drasha, another pasuk. Again, the Torah tells us v'hiza hatahor alatar hatame, that the person who's doing the splashing is a Torah person, and he splashes the paraduma waters on somebody who's tameh. So why does the Torah say he's tar? Of course he's tar. The Torah calls the whole process of paraduma water chatas water. So it must be that he's tar. So the answer is, from here you learn, he doesn't have to be totally tahar. The guy doing the splashing could be a tvil yoim. A tvil yoim, tar, mechlaushu tame. This tar, the guy that's doing the splashing, he is a little bit tame. Lime, this teaches you, al tvil yoim shekosher b'para, that a tvil yoim is kosher to splash on the para, which means that a tvul yom is somebody who, let's say, touched a sheretz, then went to the mikvah, but the sun didn't set on him, so he's not allowed to eat truma yet. But yet he went to the mikvah, so he's partially tameh still, and yet he's permitted to splash somebody else with the paraduma waters, and that's the chiddush of this extra word tahar, that he's somebody who's semi-tahar could be the one doing the splashing of the paraduma waters. Nu Gemara. Again, we're discussing the concept of oral. We said an oral is not allowed to eat truma. So boyim in Rav Sheshes. So the yeshiva boys asked Rav Sheshes, oral mal b'maiser. Somebody who's uncircumcised, can he eat maiser sheni? So ki heicha the yalaf pesach mi maiser li'inyanininas. Since there's a connection between carbon pesach and maiser sheni, that just like maiser sheni, somebody who's an oval, an oinen, can't eat maiser sheni. We have said that there's an application that somebody who's an oval can't eat the carbon pesach. So now let's go in the reverse order. Yolif nami maiser mi pesach. We're going to learn maiser from pesach, linyan arelis. That just like an uncircumcised person can't eat the carbon pesach, so also an uncircumcised can't eat maiser sheni. So it cuts both ways. An oral can't eat maiser sheni. The oy dilma, or perhaps maybe chomer mikal yalef. I could learn carbon pesach from something which is a carbon, basically, from maiser sheni. So if something is asur on maiser sheni, like for example an oinen, certainly it's going to be asur on a carbon pesach. But I wouldn't say the opposite. Kal mechomer lo yavlev. Something that is asur, let's say on pesach, for example, arelis, right? Being an oral is asur for a carbon pesach. I wouldn't say that automatically applies to the lenient maiser sheni. Maiser sheni is much lighter, a lighter type of kedusha than carbon pesach. So maybe an oral is only asur on carbon pesach and is permitted on maiser sheni. So that's the question. Oral mahu b'maiser. Can an oral eat maiser? So the Gemara says like this. Amalahu, so Rav Sheshes answered his students, tenesuha. There is a brisa. What does the brisa say? Hatruma b'habikurim. Truma and bikurim. Bikurim, is from the first fruits. You go up to the base of Migdash and you bring it to the Kohen. Truma we are aware of. So these two things have something in common that does not exist by maiser sheni. What do these two things have in common? Chayavim aleim misa. If somebody eats truma or bikurim, which are gifts to the Kohen, and if you're a Yisrael and eat that, you chayav misa b'dei shamayim, death by heaven. V'choimish, if you do it by accident, you have to pay the Kohen back, plus you have a fine of 20% more. Ba'asur and lazarim. And we already said that someone who's a non-Kohen can't eat it. Not only he can't eat a whole shear, but even a little drop he can't eat. A half an olive he can't eat it. The hein, truma and bikurim become nichsei kohen. It becomes the property of the kohen. It's like his currency, and therefore he can buy whatever he wants with it. He can marry a woman. He can buy slaves with the truma. They don't have inherent kedusha. He can buy land, property. He could buy a tamei animal. V'oilim be'echad b'meya. And truma, if it gets mixed up with chulin, normally things are batal berov. But here you have to have 100 times chulin to nullify the truma that fell in. So unless you don't have that, let's say an apple of truma fell into a barrel of apples, of a plate of apples of non-truma. If there's not 100 apples over that one apple, the whole plate has a din of truma, unless you have 1 to 100. Then it becomes batal. And that's chumrah we don't see by maiser sheni. Utu'unin richitzis yadayim. And you need to wash your hands before you eat truma, because truma could become a shlishi, and your hands are what? The sheni. You have to wash your hands. Ve'erev shemesh. In order to eat truma, it's not enough to go to the mikvah. You have to have sunset on you. Harei elu b'truma ubikurim. These halachas call out the characteristics of truma in bikurim. Mashenkin b'maiser. These things don't exist by maiser. Now, the im isa, if it is true that that an orel, an uncircumcised, is permitted in maiser sheni, wait a second. Nisne, we can let another thing that applied by truma and bikurim and did not apply by maiser sheni. Orel aser behead. Orel is aser in truma and bikurim. Masha enke b'maiser. With maiser, he's permitted in maiser sheni. So the fact that it doesn't say that, it must be that what? An orel's aser both in truma and bikurim and in maiser sheni. That's what the Gemara wants to say from this brayta. So the Gemara says that's not a proof. Why? Tana v'shir. The brayta, it's not a definitive list. It taught you things and left something out, and it left that part out. Yes, that's true that an oral is only aser in truma and not aser in maiser. Now, if it's not a definitive list, then it must have left out other things also, because a definitive list wouldn't leave out just one thing. It would leave out many things. So you're trying to say that this brayta just left a couple of things out. So my question to you is, ma shir the high shir? What else did it leave out? Answers the Gemara, shir the ketanim b'sefer. There's something left out in the end of the brayta. It leaves things out. This is not a definitive brayta list. Why? Look at the brayta in the end. The brayta says, yesh b'maiser b'kurim. There's things that apply by maiser and bikurim. Maiser sheni and bikurim, ma she'enkein b'truma, but it doesn't apply by truma. What things apply by maiser sheni and bikurim and not by truma? Simple. Shamaiser sheni v'habikurim, maiser sheni and bikurim, tu'unin hava'is makayim. You have to bring it up to Yerushalayim. You can't eat maiser sheni outside Yerushalayim. And bikurim, obviously, you brought it into the Beis Hamikdash and you donated it to the Kohen that was serving in the Beis Hamikdash. So you have to bring it to the place. Utu'unin vidui. And they need a confession. The Torah describes a confession that when you're burning maiser sheni, sometimes you have to, when you're doing the beer maiser sheni, which we'll discuss, you have to say a confession that dear Hashem, I did this mitzvah maiser sheni, and I did it very, very correctly. I didn't eat it when it was tamei. I didn't use it to bury people with. I didn't misuse the maiser sheni that you gave me. And bikurim also needs, when you come and donate the bikurim to the Kohen, you have to say the whole thing that's written in the Agoda. You have to talk about how you are a Jew and you were taken out of Mitzrayim, and you're so happy that Hashem brought you to this land and gave you this fruit. So basically, they needed a confession. These things apply by maiser and bikurim and not by truma. V'aser la'oinein. And bikurim and maiser sheni are not permitted to be eaten by somebody who is an oinin, like an ovel. That clearly says by maiser sheni, but we say that it applies by bikurim as well. Rabbi Shimon says that a maiser sheni by bikurim is permitted for an oinin. Next thing we say, v'chayovim bebir. You have to get rid of it. You have to burn it like chametz. After a certain period of time, if you didn't bring your maiser sheni up to Yerushalayim, the Torah says that you have to burn it. You can't benefit from it. You have to burn it like beer chametz. And there's a time period. You have a few years, and then if it wasn't done by the fourth year, you have to burn it. Unlike truma, there's no time limit. You could always gift the truma to the Kohen, even if you didn't do it yet. You can, if it's something that stays, you can many years later give it to the Kohen. Rab Shimon, so bikurim and maiser sheni require beer. You have to burn it if you didn't bring it up in time. Rab Shimon Paiter. Rab Shimon says bikurim does not require burning, only maiser sheni. So this is the end of the brayta. But the brayta didn't mention other things that are in common with maiser and bikurim that don't apply by truma. The ilu, it doesn't say also levaya behem betuma, that you're not allowed to burn maiser sheni or bikurim when it becomes tamei. You see, truma, when it becomes tamei, the Kohen is permitted to take it and use it as firewood for his barbecue. Let's say he has a couple of apples that became tamei, so he could use it as fuel for his firewood and benefit while it's burning it. But Maisa and Bikurim are not permitted to be burned that way. They were only used to be eaten and not to be used as firewood. So that it doesn't mention that. So these things apply by Maisa and Bikurim and not by Truma. And the Brisa did not mention that. Another thing, we go to Amud Beis. The other thing that it doesn't mention in the Brisa, if the Maisa Sheni or Bikurim are Tameh and you are Tahar, if that's the case, then you eat by you eating the Maisa Sheni and Bikurim, you get Malchus. Masha and came by Truma. By Truma, if the Truma is Tameh and the man is Tar, there's only an Isser Lav, right? There's only an Isser Aseh, but not you don't get Malchus on that. So those are two things that apply by Maisa and Bikurim and not by Truma. And yet the Brisa, like Atari, did not mention it. Alma, so we see that this Brisa is not a definitive list. Tana B'Shaya, the Brisa must have left out things. So we can assume that the Brisa also left out what? Left out the idea that only an oral is not permitted in Truma, but is permitted in Maisa. Now, again, we've seen this countless of times. We brought up a Mishnayos in Zroyim, a Brisa in Zroyim. So since there's no Gemara in Zroyim, nor in Tanaris, so the Gemara goes now and just discusses just a few things, and that will take us to the end of the daf. One thing we said, that a Bikurim and Maisa Sheni are usher for an oinen. So the Brisa says, "Va'asurin la'oinim." Rab Shimon matter. Rab Shimon says it's permitted. Manalahu. How did Rab Shimon know that it's permitted, and how did the Rabbanan know that an oval is not permitted? So I'll bring up the pasuk on my screen. The pasuk says, the Torah tells you don't eat your Maisa Sheni in Tel Aviv. You have to bring it up to Yerushalayim. Don't eat in your cities. Masa degoncha v'tiraisha v'yitzarecha, or b'karis b'cham v'chotzarenecha v'chol derecha shetidim v'nesecha u'trumas yadecha. The Torah says don't eat your Maisa Sheni and other things outside Yerushalayim, and u'trumas yadecha, and Bikurim are not supposed to be eaten outside Yerushalayim. So now it juxtaposes Maisa Sheni to Bikurim. That's this pasuk over here. Maisa Sheni and Bikurim are one thing. Trumas Yodecha, the gift of your hand, is Maisa Sheni, because the Maisa is Bikurim. Why is Bikurim called Trumas Yodecha, the gift of your hand? Because when you give it to the Kohen, you gave it to him in a basket. Your new fruits, you gave it to him in a basket. So he's not allowed to eat it outside the Yerushalayim. So let's see. So we darshan like this. And the Brisa taught Trumas Yedecha. What is Trumas, the gift of your hand? Eilu Bikurim is Bikurim. And this pasuk, the Iskash, makes a comparison between Bikurim and Meiser. So the Tanakama says, Ma Masa Osaloinim. Just like Meiser, the Torah tells you, Beferish, that an oval, Oinim, is not permitted to eat Meiser Sheni. So we're going to say the same, Ach Bikurim Osaloinim. So we're going to say Bikurim is also not permitted for an Oinim. That is the opinion of the Tanakama, because the Torah compares both. The Rab Shimon, at the end of the day, Truma Karin and Rachmana. The Torah calls Bikurim by this unusual word. It doesn't call it Bikurim. It calls it Trumas Yedecha. So maybe the Torah is comparing Bikurim to Truma, and that's what Rab Shimon says. So you say like this, Ma Teruma Muteres La'oinen, just like Truma is permitted for an oval to eat, Bikurim Muter La'oinen. That's why Bikurim is also Muter La'oinen. So now we understand why the machlekes between the Tanakama and Rab Shimon as to why an Oinim is prohibited or permitted to eat Bikurim. The Tanakama says you compare it to Maisa Sheni. Rab Shimon says you do not. V'chayavim bebi'ur. One other thing we learned is that Truma and Bikurim have to be burnt. Bikurim especially. The Torah says that Maisa Sheni has to be burnt, but with the Chiddush is that Bikurim also, if you passed a certain time, you have to burn the Bikurim if you didn't bring it up and give it to the Kohen. Rab Shimon poiter. Rab Shimon says it's potter. Why? What's the rationale behind that machlokes? Ma Makish, the Tanakama compares Bikurim to Maisa Sheni. Just like Maisa Sheni has a din of Biur, so also Bikurim has a din of Biur. Umar loy Makish, and the other Tana does not compare Bikurim to Maisa Sheni, and he only compares it to Truma. And truma, there's no mitzvah of burning truma if you didn't give it to the Kohen yet. You have all the time in the world. So also, bikurim, you have all the time in the world. There's no chiyuv of beer when it comes to bikurim. Now, another point we touched on is v'asa levayim and betuma, v'oichlim betumas atzma loika. We said two things that apply by Ma'aseh Sheni and bikurim, and that is that when Ma'aseh Sheni becomes tamei, unlike truma, you're not allowed to use it as firewood. Let's say you have Ma'aseh Sheni apples. You can't use it as firewood to make yourself warm. And so the Gemara is going to understand. And then we said another pasuk that the oichlim betumas atzma loika, that if you eat Ma'aseh Sheni and the Ma'aseh Sheni is tummy and you're tahar, you get malchus. That's the two things that we learned. Menolan. How do you know that? There's a concept of that. So the Tanya we learned in a brisa. Rab Shimon gives you the sources. The Parah says, Loi bi'arti mimenu b'tamei. Bein sha'ani tamei v'hu tahar, bein sha'ani tahar v'hu tamei. Part of the confession, I'm calling up the pasuk on my screen. The Torah says, when you confess and say you did the Ma'aseh Sheni perfectly, part of the verbal confession that you have to make, it's not a confession like sins. It's a confession of that you did the mitzvah properly. So you talk about and tell Hashem that I didn't eat the Ma'aseh Sheni when I was an ovo. I did not get rid of it when it was tamei. I didn't use it when it was tamei. What does that mean? It means whether the person is tamei and the meiser is tar. So I didn't eat when I'm tamei. I didn't eat Ma'aseh Sheni if it was tar, and the opposite scenario also. When the person's tar and the meiser is tamei, I didn't do that either. That's what he says. Bein shani tamei v'hu tar. Whether I'm tamei and the Ma'aseh Sheni is tar, bein shani tar v'hu tamei. And I'm confessing that I didn't do that when the Meiser is tahar and I am tahar and the Meiser Sheni is tamei. I didn't play around with the Meiser Sheni either. So the Gemara asks, the Brisa asks an interruption. The Brisa says a funny thing. Where do you see that you're not allowed to eat Meiser Sheni that's tamei? Or if you're tamei, you're not allowed to eat Meiser Sheni. The Brisa says, Eini Yedea. I don't know the answer to that. So the Gemara interrupts. What do you mean? Tumas haguf behed yiksiv. If you're tamei, you're not allowed to eat any kachim. That is an open pasuk. Why? The pasuk says, nefesh ashetiga boy, a body that touches any tama. Let's say you touch a sheretz, v'tama ad arif, then you're tamei till the nightfall, after you go to the mikvah. V'lo yoichal min hakadoshim. You can't eat kachim, anything that's holy, even Ma'aseh Sheni. Ki im rochatz b'sari b'mayim, until you go to the mikvah. So I have a source that if you became tamei, you can't eat Ma'aseh Sheni. So what does the Brisa mean? I don't know what the source is. So the Gemara says, Hachi kavabayale. The Brisa didn't know the source of tumas atzmai minayim. How did the Brisa know that if the Ma'aseh Sheni is tamei and you're tahar, what's the source of that? That you can't eat Ma'aseh Sheni that's tamei. So that we have another pasuk. The pasuk says, we had this pasuk that you're not allowed to eat Ma'aseh Sheni in your cities. You have to bring it up to Jerusalem. So there's a word called bish orecha. Ulahalan hu oimer. And then there's another pasuk that says that if you have kachim that became pasal, right? You have an animal that had a mum, and you can't bring it as a carbon, so you redeem it. And now you can slaughter that animal. The Torah says that animal loses its kedusha because you redeemed it. So the Torah tells you, you can eat it in your city. If you're tamei or tar, two people, one person's tamei, one person's tar, they can sit down for a meal, eating that psuli hamikdoshim. They can eat it because there's no kedusha on it because it was transferred over to money. So the Tana debei Rabbi Yishmael, afilu tamei v'tar oichlin al shulchan echad b'kara echad. Even a tamei and tar can eat on one table, one plate. There's no problem there because the truma, the kedusha of this animal is transferred over to money. So now this animal, this broken animal, can be shechted and eaten regularly. So the Torah tells you bisharecha. So we darshan like this: v'kama rachmana ahu de'amrilach hasam bisharecha teichalena hachalei teichal. By this bisharecha, I tell you, tamei and tahar can eat together, because even if the tamei makes the food tamei, the tar has no problem eating the food. So that is only applies by psuli hamikdashim. But hacha by ma'aser sheni, if you have a tamei person and tar person eating ma'aser sheni, as soon as the tamei person touches the ma'aser sheni, the ma'aser sheni is going to become tamei, and the tar will be eating ma'aser sheni that's tamei. So therefore, the Torah says that wouldn't be permitted. It only would be permitted by psuli hamikdashim, but not by ma'aser sheni. So we have a source for when ma'aser sheni is tamei. You're not allowed to eat ma'aser sheni even if you are tar. Another thing, Masha ein came betruma. What's truma? The truma says that, again, we said by truma, we learned that if it became tamei, you could use the truma as firewood. But unlike ma'aser sheni, you can't use it as firewood. Min na'olam, how do you know you're permitted to use truma as firewood? Amar Rabba Bo, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, the Amakra lo bi'artu mimenu b'tamei. The Torah says, by ma'aser sheni, you did not use it as firewood. Mimenu i'atam mabaya. Only ma'aser sheni, you can't use as firewood. But if you have oil of truma that became tamei, you are permitted to use it as fuel. So there's an extra word, mimenu. So from this pasuk, mimenu, we learn that you can use it as firewood. Truma, yes. Ma'aser sheni, not. So the Gemara asks, let us say, mimenu i'atamaver, only ma'aser sheni you can't use as firewood. But let's say other oils, let's say Beis Hamikdash oil, mincha has an oil. If that oil became tamei, maybe that can be used as firewood. Kachim, let's say that kachim can be used as fuel after it becomes tamei. So the Gemara says that wouldn't make sense. Lav kal v'chayim. Don't we have a kal v'chayim? Ma ma'aser kal. Ma'aser sheni, which is the light type of kedusha. Amar Torah lo bi'artu mimenu b'tamei. The Torah tells you don't use it as firewood. Kodesh chomer like okay. So kodesh, which is so severe, certainly you can't use it as fuel for a fire. So the Gemara asks back, if that's your kal v'chayim, ihachi truma nami kal v'chayim. Who? I'll make the kal v'chayim to truma. If ma'aser sheni you can't use as fuel for a fire, that ma'aser sheni that became tamei you can't use as fuel for a fire. So also truma you can't use as fuel for your fire. So that you can't say, says the Gemara. Hoksiev mimenu. But there's a pasuk that says you could use something as fuel for a fire. Only ma'aser sheni you can't use as fuel, but something else you could. So the Gemara asks the obvious question: Ma ra'isa? What made you decide that truma could be used as fuel for a fire when it becomes tamei, and shemen, oil of kachim, cannot be used as fuel of fire? So the Gemara says, Mistabra, it makes more logical sense that if I'm going to go strict, I'll be more strict on kachim than on truma. Why? Kodesh lo mimatena. I'm not going to let kodesh be excluded from this problem of burning it b'tamei. You can't use it. Why not? Because shekei pnekes. Because kodesh has a bunch of qualities that make kodesh something very severe. First of all, kodesh pigul. Kodesh can become pigul, which means that if you think the wrong thoughts, you can make the kachim puzzle. Noiser, there's a time limit how much you can eat kachim. Usually it's a day and a night. And carbon, it's called a carbon lashem. Me'ila, if you accidentally use it the wrong way, you have to bring a big carbon called carbon me'ila. And karis, if somebody who's not supposed to eat kachim eats it, he gets a premature death. V'aser la'inin, and although he's not allowed to eat kachim. So that's why kachim is more strict, and therefore I would say that it's much more stricter than truma. So the Gemara says, Adarabba, say the opposite. Truma le'mimatina. Truma also, I should not exclude it and should be strict on truma that you can't use it as a fuel for a fire when it becomes tamei. Why? Shekei machpaz. What's unique about truma? Misa, you get death. V'choimish, ve'ein lo pidyon, v'asur le'zarim. And it's also for zarim. In other words, truma has also qualities that make it very, very strict. And says the Gemara, hanach nefisha. Kachim has more qualities that make it more severe than truma. So again, if I have a one pasuk that tells me that you are allowed to use something when it becomes tamei as fuel for fire, and another pasuk that says you can't use it as fuel for your fire, I would say by kachim it's like ma'aser sheni, and therefore just like ma'aser sheni you can't use it as fuel for fire when it becomes tamei. Kachim also, but truma I will go lenient and say that the Torah permitted you to use it as fuel for your fire when it becomes tummy. The Ibaisim, if you want, I can tell you. Kares Adifa, the fact that Kachim, you get a premature death plus your children die, make Kachim very, very strict. And therefore, if I'm going to go strict, I'm going to go strict with Kachim and not with Truma. One more line. If you eat Truma, when the Truma is Tameh and you're Tahar, you don't get Malchus. Why? You don't get Malchus, but you do get an Avera. Manalan, how do I know that? Makra, the Torah says, Bisharecha Toicheleno. You have to eat it in your cities. You have to eat it in other words, Bisharecha Toicheleno. Only that you can have a Tameh and a Tar eat by Psulei HaBikdashim. Lezeh, only this a Tameh can eat together with the Tar, but not by something else, like Truma. Tameh and a Tar person eating Truma, the Tameh person is going to be Metame the Truma, and then the Tar person is going to eat Tameh Truma. So it's really the Lav Haba Meklal Aseh. It's a prohibition derived from a positive commandment. And therefore, there's no Malchus. It has a din like a positive commandment, essay. So that's why when you eat Truma, if you're Tar and the Truma is Tameh, you will only get an Aveira Vaseh, but you will not get Malchus, unlike Ma'aser Sheni. So this, again, we went off the topic over here because once we bring up Zroim and Taharis, we discuss it a little bit further. Okay, so ends stuff.
Thank you.
I get an error.
Have a good Shabbos.
Gute Nacht.
Good night.
Ja, Shabbos Chazak. Okay, gute Nacht.
Chazak, what is that?
Ja.